Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Unique Learning Ability Show. And today I'm really pleased to announce we have Thomas Armstrong. And I'm really excited about this one because it's we've been chatting for a little while through emails, and I just was really inspired by what you were doing previously and where you are, what you're moving into at this stage, and all these, and the way you've learned to learn, and all of this is just so exciting to hear. And so I can't wait to ask you the questions. But with for the moment, what tell us a little bit about yourself, Thomas.
Well, my background, my training is in education primarily, and also in psychology. But I've actually spent the last 36 years focused on writing and speaking. I've written 20 books now, and they focus on learning and human development. Books like The Myth of the ADD Child, In Their Own Way, Multiple Intelligences in the Classroom. Most of them are books for teachers and parents. But I've also did a self-help book for adults called 7 Kinds of Smart. And as I say, I've been speaking a lot. The books have done well, and so I've received invitations from all over the world. And I've traveled to about 30 countries, and had wonderful experiences meeting people from different walks of life and different kinds of cultures, which is another one of my fascinations, is the sort of celebrating the diversity of cultures. And so that's what I've been doing. And you mentioned where I'm moving into now. All my books previously had been nonfiction, had been, pretty well practical nuts and bolts guides with lots of strategies and that kind of thing. And actually starting about 32 years ago, I began making notes on a novel that I wanted to write about children. And so it was still in my field, of concern. And then I didn't get around to starting to write it until about 22 years ago. And then finally, well, I should say maybe just a year ago, I finally finished it. It's called Childless, and it's about a childless child psychologist who tries to foil a US government plot to declare childhood as a medical disorder and remove it from the human genome. So, it's a kind of a departure. It's a departure in terms of the style of writing. It's a novel, it's fiction. It came out of my imagination. And yet it's still linked to my concern with children, to the fact, I've been writing in the past about how children don't play anymore, and that's a very serious problem in our culture. If they don't play, they can't really develop some of the capacities that are required to keep the culture vital, and children are, being pushed into earlier and earlier kind of expectations. Preschoolers are now doing things that first and second graders used to do. And, I've been writing about this, but finally I thought, well, why not take it to the very limit and, satirize this, sort of write a dark comedy and suggest, well, what if they decided to, say, well, childhood is really, unnecessary. It's rather messy. It's rather vague. It's very emotional. It's not productive like adulthood, and we need productive adults. This is what the government says. And so, so they decide to eliminate it. And I thought, well, that's, we're becoming childless in a metaphorical sense by cutting down the natural, play of children and their curiosity. There's so much emphasis in the schools now on accountability, on standardized testing, on focusing on basic reading, math, science, and neglecting and leaving out the arts, leaving out music, leaving out drama, leaving out physical education and so forth. So I really see that, we are becoming a less child-friendly country. I'm talking, and I'm talking about the United States, although I think a lot of what I'm saying could also apply to Great Britain and to other countries, other technologically advanced countries as well. So that's just a little bit about where I've been and where I'm going. I'm working on a second novel, but I'm also planning other nonfiction books as well. So, I'm keeping busy and keeping happy and really enjoy what I'm doing.
Wow, it's fascinating what you're saying. So yeah, um, what I get from it is very much where I've come from with music and loving to be in that space of just letting things flow and not having an expectation on an outcome,
Yes.
and that really that's so important to me too, and that's where that's the reason why I'm having these conversations, is to see what, with real people that have learnt to learn, and actually when we uncover how they've learned, it's really about being creative in as many
Right.
different ways as possible as
You
well.
mentioned music. You mentioned music, and that's also what you said about yourself is also true of me. I try to spend every day um, with my piano. Essentially, well, I do some, I sing some songs. I sing Beatles songs and stuff like that. But another part of the time I spend on the piano is just improvising. It's just seeing what will come. No expectations, no trying to sound good or anything, just exploring, you know, experimenting with sounds and seeing how they, sound together and seeing if, I mean, it varies. Sometimes not much happens and other times incredible things come out that I don't know where they come from. And I just find it very centering and soothing to do that. And I think it's very important for people to take whatever it is that they are creative in or could be creative in and spend regular time every day, if possible, doing that thing, whether it be painting or drama or whatever it is, uh, working on that creative spirit that we were all born with. We all have that natural creativity inside. We can see, I mean, just look at the young child who just paints and sings and just dances and jumps and, that kind of thing. We need to preserve that kind of spirit. Unfortunately, it does tend to close down, and schools have a lot to do with it. And parenting sometimes has a lot to do with it because, parents obviously for good reasons are trying to raise their kids to function in the society. But if the society is sick, then they're helping their kids function in a sick society. That's that's one theme I pick up in my novel is that we call education helping kids fit into a sick society, and that doesn't make much sense. So we've got to remember what we're all about, what we are about as a culture and as a people who, if we look back in prehistoric times, apparently, we think of them spending all their time hunting and gathering. Apparently, they only needed to hunt and gather about 3 or 4 hours a day. And the rest of the time they played, they sang, they had rituals, they danced. They understood, the importance of going back to your sort of your spiritual roots on a regular basis. And so, yeah. So anyway, it was interesting that we have that in common, the music.
Yeah, amazing. I love all of what you just said there, in fact, you kind of moved into the answering the next two questions I was going to ask as well. But we can delve a little bit, because one
Sure.
of the next one was well, in fact, um, uh, I mean, what does a unique learning ability mean to you, first of all, Thomas?
Well, a unique learning ability where each one of us is unique. And that's a message also that kids should get. There has never been another being like you. think of all the millions and billions of organisms that have given birth to us. That's another thing that I get into in the novel, where Harvey is kind of depressed. Things don't go well in the novel for him. And so he starts musing on being childless. And he says, look at all the billions of organisms. He goes back in his mind to thinking about, his ancestors. Then he goes back to thinking about the primates that gave birth to those ancestors. Then he goes back to even more and more simple organisms, to multi-cell organisms. And he thinks, how many of them had to fight or mate and then die to make this kind of reproductive miracle happen? And then he feels by being childless, he's kind of letting them down because he's not continuing that. But at any rate, you just think about that train of life that precedes us and that gave birth to us. And each one of those lives was unique, just as we are unique. And I think that this, we're often trying so hard to fit into types. We look around us, especially these days, they go on the internet and they see, what people like, what they're, who has the most followers, who are the influencers, what kind of people are they? Well, I want to be like them, and I have this problem as well. I'm doing a lot of work on the internet, and I look at these people who have 2 billion followers and I'm thinking, well, I can't measure up to that. And so, we find ourselves wanting when we don't consider that we're unique. And that, of course, doesn't lead to anything good, can lead to depression and anxiety and all kinds of bad mental health outcomes. So we have to keep coming back to the idea that nobody can do things the way that I do things. I'm talking about each one of the people that I'm talking to. Nobody else can do that in the way that you can do it. And don't discount that. People think, well, that's just what I do, that's just, my thing. Well, your thing and what you do is amazing. It's incredible. Give it some credence, validate it, pat yourself on the back for it, because you're in all the world, what are there, about 7 or 8 billion people, and you're unique in the way that you can do certain things in life. And if you feel like, well, I don't know what that thing is, well, then you should be spending some time finding it, looking for it, paying attention to your life. What fills you with passion? What really interests you? What rouses your own kind of inner genius, whatever that might be. And, that's a good start. Pay attention to your dreams, because sometimes your dreams will give you clues. Or remember what you did as a child, when you were a child, when that spirit of uniqueness really was alive. And, what did you enjoy doing as a child that you gave up because, you got too busy, or you had a family, or you had a job, and that kind of thing. So all those sorts of things will bring you back to yourself, to your gifts, to your inner genius, to your unique learning ability.
Fantastic. The the bit that really resonated with me then, that I've been coming back to, is the patting myself on the back. I'd have like these short-term celebrations of something. I thought, yeah, that's a real achievement, but it's that daily smaller pats, as it were.
Yeah, it's a good thing at the end of the day to think back on the day and the things that you did that really, you feel expressed who you were, that gave you a sense of accomplishment, that gave you a sense of, I really can celebrate the fact that I did that. So, like you say, instead, not just in, finishing my novel after 20 years. I was telling you that I was in Abu Dhabi when I finished my novel, and I was staying at this hotel that had restaurant called the Hemingway Restaurant after Ernest Hemingway, one of America's greatest 20th century novelists. And I thought, how convenient. Here I get to celebrate finishing my novel by going to a restaurant dedicated to a writer, to a novelist.
Love
And
it.
so that's kind of the big kind of celebration. And I think, Rory, you're suggesting that we have these mini celebrations every day too, to acknowledge what we've done. I mean, yesterday we had a wonderful conversation, and then after that, I did a video on one aspect of my novel, and it was a 9-minute video, and I produced it, and I got it out there, and I put it on social networking. So, and I felt very good about that. And I thought, I'm going to celebrate that, and I did. So yeah, that's the kind of thing you should think about.
Yeah.
And when you get up in the morning, that's another thing. Think about, well, today's an open day. I could do anything. It's the day is a open possibility for me. And I do mindfulness meditation, and which is a kind of a Buddhist but also secular practice. And one of the things that mindfulness counsels is to stay in the present moment, not to be thinking ahead, or not to be, you think back to the past and you have regrets. You think ahead to the future and you have anxieties. The best thing is to stay in the present. And when you're in the present, then anything can happen. You're present for anything that might emerge. And then you're more likely to catch it. If you don't go through the day living in the present, you're going to miss a lot of things. You're going to be in your mind, oh, I should have done this yesterday. I know I got to do this tomorrow. And you just, the miracles are around you, and they're passing you by. So, you need to think of the importance of who you are, and every day give yourself credit for doing what you do in your own unique way.
Talking right here. Brilliant. I love it. In fact, you keep just answering more and more questions out of the list. But you've touched on so many areas there. What would you, if there's anything else that comes up for you that you feel grows and nurtures your own unique learning ability, Thomas?
Well, one important area that I've been working on is the concept of neurodiversity. And I've written 2 books on this, The Power of Neurodiversity and Neurodiversity in the Classroom. And this idea, really came to me. The term itself emerged from the autistic rights movement. But I've been kind of monkeying around with the kind of thoughts about, there really are, as we've been saying, there are unique brains. And we shouldn't be saying this brain is autistic and that brain is dyslexic and that brain is ADHD, etc. But rather, each person's brain is unique. I mean, literally, as an organism. It's a 3-pound organism, and there's no normal brain. I point out in one of my articles that if you want to find out what the standard kilogram is, you go to a place in Paris, and they have the standard kilogram under a bell jar. And then people bring their kilograms from different parts of different countries to calibrate it against this normal, the standard kilogram. But there's no normal brain anywhere. There's no brain under a bell jar that everybody compares their brain to. And if that's the case, then there are no abnormal brains as well. There are just different brains. So this idea of neurodiversity really is a way of celebrating the diversity of brains. It's a way of celebrating the fact that, you have strengths, particularly people who get these labels. And I've been a kind of a not really a big fan of labels like autism and learning disabilities and ADHD. I've written a couple of books on ADHD criticizing the concept. And the problem with labels like those are that people focus on the negatives. You know, you look at attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's three negatives in that label. You know, attention is neutral, but deficit, negative, hyperactivity, negative, disorder, negative. And, you know, the fact is that people who have that diagnosis have lots of gifts. They really enjoy novelty seeking. They tend to like to work in short bursts. Although at the same time, they oftentimes, if they get really focused on something, they can spend a long time focusing on it. There tend to be often more kinesthetic learners. They learn best by moving around, you know, so having a career where they can move around, you know, like a forest ranger or a FedEx delivery person or an emergency room physician or something like that is an ideal job for them. And the opposite of that would be a 9-to-5 desk job where they have to sit for 8 hours a day. And the tragedy is a lot of people who are like that end up in that kind of that really horrible job. And it's because people don't recognize their gifts, and we don't as a, you know, as a in the healing professions, in psychology and mental health and so forth. We tend to keep focusing on these medical model disorders, and we should be thinking instead about the gifts. In my novel Childless, I actually have 5 neurodiverse individuals. One person has schizophrenia, one or has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, one diagnosed with ADHD, one, no, not ADHD, one's diagnosed with autism. Did I say that? And schizophrenia, autism, or Asperger's actually, progeria, which is a disorder most people don't know about, but they probably recognize that it's the individual who ages very quickly. And, you know, an 8 or 10-year-old will look like an 80-year-old man. And that person is very important in my novel because I talk about the government trying to speed up aging. And then I've got, who else? I've got a person with dwarfism. And finally, somebody with Williams syndrome, which is a very interesting quote unquote disability, or I should say a developmental uniqueness that affects about 1 in every 9,000 people. And it causes the IQ score to go down, you know, lower IQ scores, so they can be considered intellectually disabled, but they're often very good in music. And the thing I wanted to say about the novel is that these 5 characters are all functioning in terms of their strengths in the novel. They're introduced according to their strengths, and then as the novel proceeds, the plot requires certain challenges to be met, and these individuals meet those challenges by using their strengths. And so, you know, that's really, for me, the joy of neurodiversity, is giving people an understanding of who they are in terms of their strengths. And then I'm not, you know, discounting the difficulties they face, but here's what we need to do with such individuals, with all of us, is in life, to be successful, we need to maximize our abilities, our assets, and minimize our challenges and difficulties. And if we can do that, we're going to be successful at whatever we are, at whoever we are. You know, instead of trying to overcome your disability or remediate your disorder, it's more like we're all, each one of us has some difficulties and some assets. And, you know, the thing is, some of us are able to get away with it because not being labeled, because our disabilities happen to be in areas that the culture doesn't focus that much attention on. If we lived in a musical culture, for example, where the ability to read music was more important than the ability to read words, then there'd be a lot more emphasis on dysmusia as a disorder, because there'd be people who couldn't carry a tune, or people like myself who can't read music. Even though I can improvise, I can't read music. So we're all disabled in something. So we shouldn't have to congregate certain groups of individuals and say they're the disabled ones. But of course, the more important truth is that we're all gifted as well. And the truth of life is to find out who we are by, acknowledging, yeah, we all have difficulties with something. How can we minimize those so that they don't get in our way, to keep us from doing the things that we want to do in life? And then more important, how do we maximize our gifts? A lot of people aren't even aware of their gifts. So that's the first step. But once they become aware of their gifts, how do you maximize that? How do you make it a larger part of your life so that, you can make a career out of it if you needed to, or at least it could be a central core satisfaction for you throughout your life. So that's really, what gets me excited about neurodiversity, is that it's, a very different way of approaching the issue of unique learning abilities, instead of, this old-fashioned labeling kind of thing.
Yeah, amazing. Literally just speaking my thoughts, my philosophies behind why I'm doing this show. And I'm just there just going, yep, you just
You're
tick
maximizing your
the
gifts.
question, you tick that question, you tick that question. And in fact, it was funny because I've been practicing staying more still. And then once I come off the calls, I love to move around, and it's funny that you're mentioning that too, because obviously, yeah, it's important to be focused and not distract, but by moving around as well on the camera. But yeah, it's just interesting what you said. It's interesting what you said.
Moving around on the camera is great. In fact, I found that a lot of disc jockeys have considered themselves hyperactive, or, have been diagnosed with ADHD, because they're doing a lot of different things. And you have to pay attention to a lot of things as you're conducting the interview. You have to keep in mind your questions, and there's technical things you have to monitor. And then there's me, of course, that you have to monitor. And that involves a lot of movement, both external and internal. So you're celebrating your strengths.
Yeah. And I can DJ as well. It's so funny.
Yeah,
But yeah,
there you go.
so funny. But yeah, so you kind of touched on this one as well. But what does creativity mean to you, Thomas?
Well, creativity, is an interesting thing, because we tend to sort of put it out there as something, oh man, I wish I was creative like this person, like this dancer, or like this artist, and we should think about what creativity really means. It means to create, and the ability to create, and in particular, create something new, something different, something novel. And we can all do that. Being creative doesn't just mean being an artist or being a musician. Being creative, people can be creative with their lives, creative in the way that they relate to other people. Another area that I've been interested in is multiple intelligences. This idea that we have 8 different intelligences, and we can be smart with words, we can be smart with music, we can be smart with pictures, with nature, with other people, with our inner life, with our inner self, with science and math. I mean, there are all these different ways of creating. And so, if we think about it that way, it doesn't become a sort of something that other people do, something that I wish I could do. It becomes accessible to all of us. Is there a creative way to make dinner or lunch? And there are, in fact, creative ways to do those things. And is there a creative way that I can go to go to work tonight today, instead of going always this same way. I think I'll go around, and then there's something I really am curious about. Curiosity is a big part of creativity too,
Mm.
because the creative person is curious. Why is something like this? I remember I was in Monterrey, Mexico, and I was at a conference that this Nobel Prize winning economist was speaking at. And I was kind of, hanging out a little bit with, well, I wasn't hanging out with him. I was going into the door with him to the conference. And then all of a sudden, he learned about a church that was kind of across a park. And he immediately, although there were all these photographers and cameras and everything on him, he just went around and went back to the church because he heard that there were some frescoes, interesting frescoes on the walls. And he was like a little kid. He was just curious. He wanted to find out, what kind of pictures and what was the history behind them and so forth. And I just kind of looked at this and I said, yeah, okay, this guy's carried the little kid around with him. And I think that's creative people do that. They're like little kids in that sense that they, want to know how the world works. They want to try out new things. The little child doesn't know how to do, all kinds of things. So he has to, start out, brand new to things. And that's the attitude that we should have. Picasso said, I used to paint like Raphael, but it's taken me my whole life to learn how to paint like a child. And which is amazing. And many other great individuals have compared what they do, including Isaac Newton. He says, to many people, I appear to be this very serious scientist, but to myself, I'm like a little kid playing on the beach, picking up little shells and looking at them and admiring them. And, Alexander Fleming, the discoverer of penicillin, said, I like to play with microbes. This playfulness is a big part of creativity. When I play the piano, I really like to fool around. What happens when I make this sound? What happens when I make that sound? And if I'm lucky, I can take keep the we have these inner voices that say, well, this doesn't sound very good, or you're really not being creative, or you're just, you can't measure up because you can't read music. We have these inner voices that are like shaming us and keeping us from recognizing our inner uniqueness. And those are voices that we should recognize and learn not to listen to, essentially. To say, okay, there you are. There's those stupid voices again. Forget about it. I'm going to do what interests me, what fills me with excitement, whether or not you like it or not, whether or not it meets your requirements, your rules. A lot of these are parental voices. Parents who wanted you to be a lawyer or a doctor instead of a musician or a writer. Parents who said, stop that nonsense when we were scribbling. I used to take my what was it? The living room table, kind of a low living room table. And I'd scoop myself underneath it and I'd take my crayons and draw on the bottom of it, kind of like Michelangelo did with the Sistine Chapel. And I thought this was the greatest fun. But then one day my dad discovered it and he gave me the biggest spanking. And I thought, geez, here I am being creative. And, I get this kind of feedback. And I think those sorts of things, these events, actually I've called those things paralyzing experiences, which, we get up to sing in school and the teacher says, well, just mouth the words, dear. We don't need to hear your voice. We get shamed in front of other people. And what we do then is we close down. We say, okay, I love music, but now I'm not going to be musical at all, because every time I do it, somebody tells me I'm no good or embarrasses me. And there's the reverse of a paralyzing experience, something that Howard Gardner calls crystallizing experience. And those are experiences that open us up to our possibilities. Like when Einstein was 4 years old, his father gave him a magnetic compass. And he said that from that moment, he wanted to figure out how the universe worked. From that very moment, as a 4-year-old. And that was his crystallizing experience, or at least one of his. He had others as well. And so the hope is that we have, and that you have out there, people listening and watching this, that you have crystallizing experiences, or that you remember old crystallizing experiences when uh, somebody did something for you that really opened up a new possibility. And I remember getting all these memories. I tell you to remember your childhood, and I start remembering my childhood. But I remember Davy Crockett. You probably don't know in the Great Britain Davy Crockett, but he was a pioneer Western, frontier kind of guy with a coonskin cap, and lived in the 19th century and hunted with a rifle. And they had a TV show on about Davy Crockett. He was a big deal in America, and I wanted to have some fringe on my pants, like Davy Crockett. So I took some paper and I started cutting fringe. And my dad noticed it and he said, "What are you doing?" I'm saying, "I'm making some fringe pants so I can be like Davy Crockett." And he said to Mom, "Why don't you take him to the store?" And they took me to the store, and they bought me a whole Davy Crockett outfit, including the coonskin cap, including the rifle, including a kind of a horn for putting the gunpowder in and all that. I could hardly believe it. Here I had this desire, and they said, "Go for it," And I think that those kind of experiences were valuable in helping me through the negative voices, and helping me realize, hey, if you want something, the universe is there to get it for you. If you hope for it, hard enough, that you can be all that you can become. And so we need help from the environment, to be sure, but right in here is the biggest environment of all for us, because we're living in our brains 100% of the time, and what goes on in here determines largely who we will be, how we will do it, and whether we will be happy in life. And so we come back to unique learning abilities. And that's what essentially it's all about, is recognizing who you are as a unique individual who has something that nobody else can contribute to the culture. And you should, be amazed by that. It's one of those things, like thinking about, like, if you think about, if you ever look up at the sky and wonder how far things go and how far the stars are away, and the more you think about it, the more amazing that you feel. And we should feel that about ourselves and about our brains, that we are amazing, each one of us. And if we only spent some time thinking about that, uh, who knows where it could lead? Who knows where it could lead?
Oh, oh my gosh. It's like there's no way I could have stopped you from, talking. There's no way I would want to stop you from talking as you're talking, because there's just so much information. In fact, I'm gonna have to go over this a couple of times, you know, re-watch myself, and yeah, so much interesting gold and insights that can come from learning from what you've learned about, and it's amazing, Thomas. So thank you. Um, that you described a couple of things about how I help people as well with their mental fitness and understanding those stories and things like that.
Right.
And what I loved about what you said about creativity being, um, it's a it's a it's a it's like it's a choice, but it can be so simple, and that just making making fun, making it fun, and but as in doing something new, a different way, or something new. That's all
Right.
creativity is, when we decide to do something different and not do the same pattern. I mean,
Right.
I think we learn from repetition, obviously, so it reinforces stuff, but there's also
Yeah.
this process of dynamic well, I love the word dynamic. So dynamic change, dynamic ways
Right.
of looking at
Hmm.
things. And so, yeah, thank you for all of that. It was absolutely
Sure.
amazing. I've still got a couple of questions that I'd love to ask you, which is one of them's what's the one thing that gets in the way of you performing at your best, Thomas?
Well, probably my mood disorder, which is part of my neurodiversity. I have a history of depression, and my father was also depressed, and he was out of work for 17 years as a pediatrician. And I've had about 5 of these major depressions in my life. And when I'm in the middle of one of those, man, it really cuts back on everything in my interests. One of my great loves is to read great literature. I love, the best literature in the world that I can possibly find. And so um, during my depression, I had no interest in reading. And there you go. I mean, if you're not interested in reading, you're not going to find out all these wonderful things that are in books. And so that my biggest challenge is never to get that depressed again. And to do that, I mean, we're back to maximizing your assets and minimizing your difficulties. And what I do about that is I meditate, I medicate. I have some psychoactive medications that I take. I'm on a Mediterranean diet because that's associated with a lower risk of depression. I exercise every day. I do yoga every day. I go to therapy once a month or so. Um, I express gratitude about 3 or 4 times a day to all the things in my life. And there are other things that I do. And I never want to go through another one of those things again because it's totally, life denying, and it's not worth it anymore. So yeah, that's my big bugaboo, I guess, my big, what Churchill called his black dog, because he suffered from depression as well. Look at all the things Churchill did, and yet he had this depression sitting on him. It just makes you amazed. He was a Nobel Prize winner, and people think, well, obviously he'd be the Nobel Peace Prize, right? Because he brought peace. He helped win World War II. But no, he won the Nobel Prize for literature because he'd written like a 12-volume history of England and a 4, 5, 6-volume history of World War II. And I mean, when does he have the time to do all of this? He's busy running the country. He's busy fighting Hitler, and he's dealing with his depression at the same time. I mean, we've got to be inspired. That's another thing that can help us as well, being inspired by people who are able to do these amazing things. And it's like, if he's depressed and he can do all of that, I certainly can deal with what I'm dealing with and be my best self as well.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I loved again everything you said there. And yeah, we can certainly embrace our humanism and know that that there's natural moments where we come up against ourselves like that, and yeah, to recognize
Right.
it and be aware and know that it is it's a life denying thing.
Mhm.
Sometimes we can't, even though we've learned that it is a choice and we're still stuck in it, that there's some kind of things. There are ways, and I love that what you described, how you manage your mind, body, and emotions. And if I was, that was actually again the next question I was going to ask. So yeah, it's brilliant that you kind of tagged that in and mentioned all of that. So um um, I just let's just say I already asked that halfway through what you just said. In terms of the yoga you do and the meditation and the exercise,
Yeah.
is there anything else that you'd say
Well,
managing your
part of
mind?
this part of this issue, you mentioned mind body, and people say, well, you're feeling depressed, you should just you know uh, get happy, because it's a choice. And the thing is, well, yeah, to some extent it's a choice, but it's also in your brain. It's also has to do with your brain, with your biochemistry. And it goes back to neurodiversity. I've got a different sort of brain. Now I could say, well, I'm depressed, blah, blah, blah. I can't do this because I'm depressed. But instead, I look at the issue of what is there positive about depression? In fact, the funny thing is, when I was writing The Power of Neurodiversity, I was I wrote a chapter on depression where I was writing about the positives of depression at the same time as I was going through a major depression. And I thought, well, this is tough, talking about the positives while I'm feeling like incredible pain every day. But it was good for me. It was good for me to think about the good stuff.
Mm.
And one of the interesting things about depression has to do with rumination. Rumination, it's your mind going over things over and over again. That's what depressed people often will do. Oh, I didn't do this very good, and this isn't happening very well. And why didn't I go do this when I was younger? And da, 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 da. This rumination is a key factor in depression. But here's the thing: rumination is an asset if you're a writer and or a problem solver. And I'm a writer, and rumination really helps me because I'm thinking in my mind, I'm sifting through ideas, I'm trying out, and I do it all the time. I do it if I'm doing my exercise. I call it rehearsing. I'm rehearsing in my mind. I'm talking to somebody about an idea and I'm bouncing my ideas off of other people. That makes me a better writer. Because when I sit down and write, I'm basically taking dictation from my brain, because I've worked these things out by ruminating on them. So that's the asset part of depression that often people neglect to see. And if we raised more awareness about that, then it would be more like, well, being a person with a mood disorder, you realize you also have this gift for rumination. Maybe you can use that to help you in life. And my being a writer, has basically made my whole living. I haven't had to work for the last 35, 40 years. I mean, I don't really feel like I've worked in the sense that people use this. That's why I wouldn't think of retiring. What am I going to retire from if I've never worked? Because I've just been a writer and a speaker. I've done the things that I love to do anyway.
Yeah.
And so, you know, uh, I should thank my mood disorder for giving me the kind of brain that I needed to have to be able to do those kind of things.
Yeah. Ah, love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Um, yeah. Just one little thing that comes up for me there is, well, is the that I call that proactive reflection. It's to say, to be conscious of what you're applying to your thinking, and rather than this subconscious letting it happen to you kind of approach, well,
Right.
not just approach, it's an approach of the subconscious to allow that. If it's going to happen, you might as well grab hold of it like wild horses and give them reins, you know?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Nice metaphor. Yeah.
Brilliant, awesome. So yeah, yeah, I really, really appreciate you brought that up, and there'll be a lot of listeners that can really get something out of that, to be able to know that we're all in this together in a way, and that this does happen to not even just the strongest of neurodiverse or um, obviously affected neurodiverse brains, but
Mhm.
even if you're suspecting something, listen to whether you feel upset or imbalance, out of balance, or whatever it is, to be able to know that um, that there's things that we can actually actively do, and that happiness is the output. Is an output. It's not a thing that we achieve by just going, I'm going to be happy. Like you said, it's
Right.
it's it's the processes in which how we take the reins and do things that then have a positive effect on us.
Right.
Um, and that can, like you say, there's the mental aspect of this, and it can manifest in the body as well. So the chronic
Mhm.
health conditions, chronic feelings, chronic
Right.
pain, chronic things like that. It's all about, from my point of view, understanding about what I've learned is around changing perspective about how you feel. And so there's these I call these four inner behavioral patterns that you can actually grab hold of, which is thinking and feeling without realizing it. You can kind of think and feel in, or just notice and start to guide them more better, and also connection and expression patterns. And that's where we're connecting to people, for instance. If we realize we're not doing that, it doesn't matter about what perfect connection we do or have with someone. It just gets to be someone that we can connect with for no reason, no output, no reason, just to connect with them in that moment when we're ruminating in a subconscious way. To just
Right,
connect to someone else, even to hear what they're saying, is just connecting to them. And then self-expression, to be able to talk about what it is. So connection, expression are just inputs and outputs of our behaviors.
right,
Um,
right.
so yeah, I just felt like that had to come out from on reflection of what you were saying.
Sure.
Uh, yes, thank you so much for this. And how do you want the world to develop and transform, Thomas?
That's a tough one because we live in a very odd time. Uh, I think that, well, how I would like it to develop, obviously, is toward more harmony, towards more cooperative work together. I think that we're past the stage, but certainly at an important stage where we need to stop thinking of ourselves less as nations and more as a planet, you know, as an Earth, that we're all in it together. Um, and what we do, what one person does over here affects somebody over there, or affects all of us. You know, and I think about this in terms of the war in Ukraine, you know, and of the Russians threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons or a dirty bomb. And I'm thinking, well, I mean, think this out from a strategic point of view. We want to take over the Ukraine. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop a nuclear weapon and contaminate large regions of the country that we want to take over. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes no sense at all because we're all connected. Somebody, you know, explodes a nuclear weapon and it's going to affect everybody in the whole world. And so, you know, we need to get beyond the limitations, you know, whatever Putin's limitations are. You know, he wants to make Russia great again, like the Soviet Union, perhaps. We need to get beyond those sorts of grandiose types of thinking. You know, we've had our own horrendous example with former President rhymes with rump. I won't say his name. Rhymes with rump. And, you know, he wants to make America great again. And in the process, he did all sorts of horrible things. But so, you know, didn't want immigrants in the country, even though our nation was founded largely on immigrants, right? A lot of our immigrants came from Great Britain. A lot of my family came from Great Britain. And so what are we to say, that immigrants shouldn't come into the United States? No, we're all connected. And we all, peoples move around. You know, everyone is an immigrant. I can't imagine that there's any group of people that, you know, have stayed where they are, you know, for the last 10,000 years. Because usually where they're staying gets to be not so inviting, right? And so, hey, let's move to a better place. And so, you know, at any rate, we've got to get that sense of cooperation rather than competition,
Mm,
of groupthink, of thinking ourselves as a unity. And you know, I like, there was this thing called planetary citizenship. It might still be around, but you could actually apply for and get a passport um, for planetary citizenship. And you know, ideally it would be like a passport you could show any place in the world and they would let you in. Obviously, it won't let you in anywhere, as far as I know. Um, but the idea was good. And I'd like to see us move toward a place in our world where we could do something like that.
Love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing. And even just as a simple, what would you say the simplest step in this process could be if there was a simple step?
Well, the simplest step, the easiest step is to start with ourselves. You know, there are too many people that say, oh, the world's got to change. And then we ourselves remain locked up in conflicts and self-recriminations and stuff. Um, you know, imagine that you yourself are the world. What kind of, and you have hopes for peace in the world. Well, how about peace in yourself first? You know, once you get peace in yourself going, then you can start to think about how you can transmit that. I mean, once you're at peace yourself and you start to interact with other people, you're going to be communicating that sense of peace to other people. You're going to be spreading it around. And so that's essentially, where it begins.
Yeah.
Here in the, Voltaire wrote this book, Candide, where the character goes around the world and discovers all these horrible things going on. The Lisbon earthquake, the Jesuits torturing the South American indigenous peoples. And finally he comes back and, he has this professor who named Pangloss, and Pangloss's philosophy is we live in the best of all possible worlds. And so Candide comes back to his professor and he says, I've been around the world. I'm afraid you're wrong. This is not the best of all. And the last message that Voltaire gives at the back of the book is a short book. It's really a wonderful book that you should read. Everyone should read. At the end, it's in the end, we should cultivate our own gardens. We should cultivate our own gardens, and that's essentially what I just said, but in a more beautiful, poetic way. And as we cultivate our gardens, we are making the world a better place in which to live.
Yeah. Thank you. Nice one, Thomas. So, just we're on the final streak now. What's the funniest thing you've seen on a train?
The funniest thing I've seen on a train, well, my ex-wife, who was then my wife, and I and my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, we were all on a train at the Grand Canyon in America. And we were on this train and some actors, this was part of a kind of a pre, it had already been prepared in advance. Some actors held up the train, in fun, because it was sort of a reenactment of the Old West. And my brother-in-law is a very talented person, very playful, very creative, and he has had a background in the theater. And so when they came in and started holding everybody up, he went into the middle area facing the actors, and he says, "Don't hurt me, I have parents." And it was just the funniest thing, the way he said it. I mean, he was just really expressive. And he was so expressive that it stopped the actors in their tracks. They weren't prepared to deal with somebody who would play along with them. They were used to people who go, "Oh my God, what's this? Oh, that's just an actor." And he just went right into their play and became part of it. And they didn't know what to do with it. And that was also part of the funniness of it. And so that to me is the funniest thing on a train.
Brilliant. Excellent. Uh, so what's next for you, Thomas?
Well, I'm, as I said, I'm working on a second novel about a Buddhist who gets kicked out of a monastery in Central Asia in the 9th century. So he gets kicked out. He's in what we now call Afghanistan, and he goes up to this river, and he goes up the river, and the river called the Amu Darya empties. It used to, not now, but it used to empty into the Caspian Sea. So he ends up in the Caspian Sea, and a Viking ship happens to be there that came down from the north, down the Volga, and they pick him up and they take him to Iceland. So it's about his adventures as a Buddhist in Iceland, essentially, with his Buddhist beliefs, and then the pagan beliefs of the Vikings, and then early Christianity, which was just starting to take off in Scandinavia around that time. So I've just got, I'm on the chapter 4, and I've just got him up to the river. And now I'm gonna have to get him onto a boat and going up the river. It's like each stage, you have to kind of say, okay, now we're at this stage. What do I need to know? So I've been finding out all this great stuff about Central Asia and about the Amu Darya
Wow.
and how the Russians contaminated the Aral Sea, and just and the history of Central Asia, the Zoroastrian religion, which was a big part of that area, as well as Buddhism, of course, and Islam was a part of it as well. So the mix of all these different religions and beliefs, to me, it makes for a fascinating, and it's funny. I didn't plan it to be funny. I planned it to be like an Icelandic saga, like Egil's saga or Njal's saga. And as right from the start, it was just funny. I just started putting in these things, not caring about the 9th century. I mean, it is in the 9th century, but if I feel like bringing something in from the 20th century, like for example, he gets kicked out of his sangha because he disagrees with his teacher about something, and so to give his point, he hums a tune by Benny Goodman. It's got to be this or that. I don't know if you know that song, but it's got to be this or that, because they're tackling a philosophical issue. So he sings the Benny Goodman song and he gets kicked out. So I don't know where that came from, but it came. And so, we were talking earlier about the playfulness.
Mm.
And that's what I feel like I'm doing when I'm writing my books, is I'm being playful. And I should say, it's not all wonderful stuff. You get stuck very easily. You also have work to do. I mean, I've got to find out about what this looks like, what kind of boat would be floating down the Amu Darya in the 9th century. And so, there's that work, but that can be enjoyable as well.
Wow, sounds intriguing, absolutely intriguing. And it's been really fantastic to speak to you, Thomas. In fact, just listen to you. You've been imparting. It's so funny that it's just been like covering everything that wanted to ask you in all ways and different ways and stories and everything.
Good,
I loved it. I loved it. And
good.
I'm sure everyone watching has loved it too. So,
I'm glad.
um, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you.
Sure.
And is there something that you can give to the audience so that they can get a bit of
Sure.
value from you?
Sure. I've developed we're talking a lot about strengths during the conversation, and I've developed a 165 item inventory or checklist of strengths so that, if you have a child and you want to find out what their strengths are, or you want to know what your strengths are, this is a really comprehensive look at as many strengths as I could think of to put in one place. And so I'll give you a link to that checklist, which you can
Amazing.
then print out and use, in any way that you'd like. I'd recommend you take it yourself first, and then if you have a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD or dyslexia or intellectual disabilities or autism or whatever, that you fill this out for them or with them also. So it's a really
Wow.
valuable tool.
Fantastic. That sounds amazing. That's so nice of you. And
Sure.
oh wow. Yeah. I I'm now running out of words because you've given me so many words to already
Good.
to compute and yeah, I loved it. I loved it. Thank you so much for being here again. And um, we'll close it off for now. And
Thank you
any
for having me on.
Thank you, Thomas. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to mention?
Um, well, just my appreciation for what you're doing, and my thanks to you for making uh, this kind of conversation available to your listenership.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, yes. So again, Thomas Armstrong. Check out his new novels that are going to be coming out, and his work. That's yes, that looks really interesting as well. And I love where you're taking it from more academia into well, as we know, it's all creative
Yeah,
spaces, but how you're going
more
from
fictional, more
yeah,
fictional,
story,
uh,
fun stories,
more
fun, I
place
mean,
for the imagination to grow.
imaginative. Yeah,
Yeah.
lovely, awesome. So thanks for watching this wonderful, free-flowing, unique learning ability show episode, and we'll see you again another time for another one. Okay, much love. Take care. All the best.
Take care. Bye bye.